Hello, and a very warm welcome to the New Mummy Company YouTube channel. Today, we are here to record our third video in a series with Nicole Belina from Bliss Consulting. So, if you haven't watched our last two videos, then please go check them out. We will link them down below so that you can see those videos. The first one is sex in pregnancy, and the second video is sex and intimacy after you've had your baby. So they are all connected to this series. Today's video, we are going to be talking about everything postpartum mental health. And this is something that I am very passionate about, and I know that Nicole is as well. And that is why we are very excited to bring you all of this really great information. Thank you for joining me yet again, Nicole. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. Thank you so much for having me back again, Maria. I appreciate it.
Well, I guess we should start off by sort of explaining the basics because the word postpartum is used so much and it doesn't really have a definitive, because to some people postpartum is the first 6 weeks after having their baby. To some people postpartum means postpartum depression. And then we kind of have the medical definition of what postpartum is. So, can you explain to everybody that's watching what is postpartum? Like, how long genuinely, or what would we consider to be postpartum?
For sure. Yeah. So I think there's kind of two terms that get thrown around a lot, postpartum and then also perinatal. So I do want to distinguish between the two. So postpartum is basically it's 1 year following the birth of the baby. Perinatal is everything that is included from conception until 1 year after birth. So it gives you that whole time frame from conception to 1 year. Postpartum is really just meant to be that 1 year time frame following birth. That is, as you said, sort of the medical definition of it, right? And sort of what we see on paper. In reality, when we're talking about postpartum mental health, we really want to understand that it actually can be quite a bit longer than even just 1 year, right? It can sometimes be the first couple of years when we start to think about things that happen during those time frames. So, for example, if they've been breastfeeding, when you start to wean baby off of nursing, there can be some hormonal shifts that happen during that time. If mom has been home with baby on a maternity leave, right? And then they have to go back to work. So now they're transitioning their toddler into daycare or some other sort of, care setup. And mom's having to go back to work, or dad, depending on who stayed home, partner. So there's a lot of shifts that happen in those first few years. And so we really want to honor the fact that, just because you're at that 1 year mark, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden these things, go away. It's definitely still an important time frame.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, for everyone who is in that postpartum phase, it is what it is to you in how long it is, because everybody's journey is so individual. So thank you for sort of clarifying what the time frame is. And I think it's very helpful for people to know the difference between perinatal and postnatal or postpartum.
Yeah.
So getting right into the mental health aspect of it, health is wealth as a general term, and thankfully we are getting more comfortable with having mental health conversation. But
Yeah.
in particular, why is postpartum mental health so important?
For sure. This is a time, as I kind of just said, right? This is a time when a lot is happening. There's a lot of changes. And so it is really important to be aware of, what are the things that could possibly be coming up? How are we, intervening? What are we doing proactively and reactively to try to support new parents, right? This is a time frame that, is so beautiful. It's so amazing, right? It's filled with so much joy and so much love and like so much excitement, but it's also filled with difficulty, challenges, lack of sleep, huge, huge lifestyle changes, right?
Absolutely.
And so we really want to understand that, maternal mental health, it has an impact on the whole family. As you said, right? Health is wealth. Like if if mom is struggling, if she's having a really hard time, that's going to affect the whole family. Whether that's, just baby, just born, partnership, relationship with other children in the family, right? Just family dynamics, how all of those things can be unfolding. So we really want to work toward this ideal that every parent can try to enjoy this period, right? To experience the enjoyment that comes with this phase of life. And if mom is having a more positive experience, and her symptoms are managed and she has all of these supports, right? That actually benefits everyone in the whole family, right? So we really want to be aware of these things so that we can try and address them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And support is so, so essential.
Definitely.
So, who is at risk? Is everyone who is postpartum at risk, or is there specific people that should maybe be paying more attention to their mental health after they've had a baby?
For sure. So yes and yes. um, so perinatal mood disorders are the number one, like most common complication with pregnancy and postpartum. And unfortunately, not everyone is screened, right? It depends really on the healthcare provider or the setup that they have, or just so many factors, right? Statistically speaking, 1 in 5 will experience a mental health concern, either in pregnancy or postpartum. However, those who have a history of a mood disorder are at higher risk. And so, what that means is folks who already have anxiety or depression are going to be at a higher risk of experiencing those things when they are in that postpartum phase, right?
Yeah.
This, again, like I said it multiple times, is such a major life change, right? Physically, during pregnancy, delivery, postpartum, physically so much is happening in the body, but then there's also a lot of lifestyle changes, a lack of sleep, just trying to figure out what am I doing here with this like tiny human, and a lot of those things, it's really hard to prepare for them, right? Sometimes it's different, pregnancy to pregnancy. Some
Mhm.
people might also experience it in a first pregnancy, but not in the second pregnancy, or even vice versa, right? Because again, thinking about different factors in your first pregnancy, you don't have any other children running around, perhaps, right? And in the second, you do. So now your sleep is disrupted in a different way because you also have a toddler you have to be looking after and getting, through the day, right? So all of these different factors come into play. And so we really want to be aware, do you have a history? Do you have a family history, right, of this? Okay, be more mindful, but it actually can affect anyone at any point in time. The other thing I want to note too is that, we often talk about maternal mental health. I also want to just kind of point out that dads and partners can also develop postpartum depression. For women, for moms, it's typically higher risk because of the hormonal changes. We find with partners, a lot of times it has to do more with those lifestyle changes, right? Where, everything was a certain way, and now it is completely different and totally upside down. And sometimes partners feel a bit helpless to support their partner as well. If mom is struggling and going through a hard time, sometimes partners, feel a bit like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, right? And so that can sometimes lead to that for them as well. So we don't want to discount partners either in this discussion.
No, of course, of course. There's two parents for a reason, and they both go through their own journey, but we very much want to, highlight the fact that it could be either parent. Most likely it's going to be the birthing parent, but
Yes.
obviously there is a significant chance of it being the other parent.
Yeah.
So, if you develop some mental health challenges postpartum, how do you know which one you're suffering from? Because obviously, there are different types of conditions that can occur. So, for example, how do you know that you're not just having the baby blues, or do you need other people to indicate to you? Will the mom know herself? So, how do we know what degree of postpartum depression we're having? Or is it possible that we have more than one condition? Could you have depression and anxiety at the same time?
Definitely. Yes, for sure. Um, so kind of the range of options really, right, is we have postpartum in front of a bunch of other things that we already know exist otherwise, right? So anxiety, depression, psychosis, OCD, PTSD, all these, acronyms that we have. That exist in isolation on their own, but now we're talking about ones that develop specifically related to that postpartum period, right? And so this is, of course, why if you have already one of these experiences or one of these disorders, you're going to be at higher risk of that, being triggered postpartum. So there is a little bit of sort of like a hierarchy, if you will, like where it kind of increases in intensity, and also decreases is in frequency. So when we start with the baby blues, if we start kind of on the sort of milder end, the baby blues is something that affects like 80 to 90% of new parents.
Mhm.
This is very, very common. It has to do with the hormonal shift that happens around day 3 or 4, where progesterone, sorry, and estrogen drop significantly. And so this really impacts birthing parent in physically how they're feeling. What's really important to know here is that parent still feels like themselves, right? They feel like I'm still me, but I feel heightened emotions, right? I feel like everything is just up and down. It feels like a total roller coaster. I'm totally feeling all of my emotions at this heightened version. So I go from extreme joy to, totally overwhelmed. And I might be crying a lot and just like really struggling, but I feel like me, right? I still feel like me. That's really important. This phase doesn't usually last any longer than about 2 weeks, right? That's pretty average. If it's lasting longer than 2 weeks, that's a bit of a red flag that we could be looking at, a longer, more pervasive type of mood disorder. But in terms of sort of the general baby blues, we're looking at about 2 weeks, right? With postpartum depression, this is where it starts to shift. So the person doesn't feel like themselves anymore, right? There's this switch that happens in the brain and they feel different now. They're not
Mhm.
experiencing positive emotions. They're not enjoying things that they typically used to enjoy. They might be having negative thoughts about their self and their belief in themselves, right? This idea of I'm not cut out for this, right? I'm not good enough. I can't do this. They maybe have a lot of guilt, right, around, their feelings. This tends to come up a lot in the thought process as around all of those shoulds of motherhood, right? All of those like myths about how things should be and how things shouldn't be, these expectations, it can really fuel those symptoms, right? Like you should have it all together, you know? I remember when Meghan Markle had Archie, and a couple days into it, they had her out in public in a white, full white suit. And I was just like, oh, we are setting unrealistic expectations here that this is possible and that this is what we should be doing, right? So there just are these unrealistic standards. And so that can be really difficult when you're sort of measuring yourself to that, right? Um, One thing I really want to distinguish here, and this is depression in general, but just postpartum depression is obviously what we're talking about. But depression doesn't equal sadness, right? Depression doesn't always look like I feel sad and I'm crying and I can't manage. A lot of the time it looks like fatigue, like extreme fatigue. It looks like a lack of motivation, this, like I said, a lack of belief in yourself and your ability to do something, right? It's sort of this like sense of kind of being frozen, of being stuck in the mud, right? And I think we have a bit of a misconception sometimes of what depression can be,
Absolutely.
right? And so then we overlook it a lot of the time. Yeah, so that's depression. Then, if we shift into postpartum OCD, so this is where you will have just intrusive thoughts coming in, right? And they're really quite distressing. This could be thoughts of harming the baby or of yourself. Just this, it's kind of taking depression to another level in terms of those intrusive thoughts of, I
Mhm.
cannot do this. I have to, escape somehow. I need to end what's happening here. Um, Another like really distinguishing factor in this one is that the person knows what's happening to them. Right? They're
Right.
aware that something is off. They're having these thoughts. They're distressed by those thoughts, right? And they're like, why am I feeling this way? I don't understand what's happening to me. I don't want to harm my baby, but I keep thinking that I do. Or, right, they're having these thoughts, but they know that it's happening and they are distressed by it. That is really important. A lot of folks will be afraid, right, to talk about these thoughts, right? They're afraid that if I say something, there's going to be, a big reaction to that. And so it can actually also, like you kind of asked, can we have more than one? It can also turn into depression as well if I feel isolated in my thoughts, right? If I'm afraid of my thoughts and I don't know where to go with them, if I feel that level of distress about my thoughts, right? Like that can definitely turn into depression for sure. But with OCD, really, like the really key thing here is the intrusive thoughts that are coming in, but the person knows that they're coming in and they're feeling awful about them, right?
Mhm.
Psychosis, on the other hand, this is where folks often don't know what's happening to them. So, this is sort of the most dangerous, quote unquote, if you will, the most risky in the sense that here is where we do actually have a higher risk of things like infanticide. And as I said, right, as we move towards the more intense, we decrease in frequency, right? So this is not as common as the baby blues, right? Less people will experience this, but it is higher intensity, right? Um, in psychosis, folks will have hallucinations, difficulty with understanding reality. They are likely not sleeping at all, right? Like they feel like they don't need sleep, right? They have a lot of energy. They might be delusional, have really odd beliefs or odd behavior, but they don't think anything is wrong, right? I've got this. Look at me. I don't have to sleep. This is great. I've got this all under control, right? Um, so here's where we want to be a bit mindful, right? Is we want to be watching for, are their thought processes totally illogical, right? Are they having disturbing thoughts, but like they're not noticing it? Like if they just said it to you as if like that's totally normal, right? We want to go, oh, red flag, something's
Yeah.
up here, right? Um, Psychosis, higher risk comes with folks who have bipolar disorder or like their own diagnosis or a family history. But I think personally, kind of the scariest part about this one is that a lot of people have never had a psychotic episode prior. And so that's again where we want to talk about screening, being mindful. Later, we're going to talk a little bit in this video about, how to prevent or be mindful of some of these things. And, a lot of that has to do with education, right? So helping new parents, both, right? Like a birthing parent, but also a supporting parent, if there is one, to know and understand what the signs are so that they can intervene really quickly and help get this under control, right? Depending on what it is.
So to recap, then what I heard from you was that the birthing parent will know that they are suffering from OCD or baby blues or depression, but when it gets to psychosis, they won't know themselves. And so that's where family members or anyone who is involved in supporting them is going to be the one to sort of take a step back and think,
Something's off here.
we might need some medical support here.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah, I sort of look at it like baby blues, I feel like myself, but I feel really emotional. Depression, I don't feel like myself, right? There's an opposite there. OCD, I know what's happening and I'm distressed by what's happening. Psychosis, I don't know what's happening, right? And I'm looking for other people, as you said, to offer that support to me.
Okay. Okay. And of course, it is a very difficult thing for family members to need to intervene. And I'm sure there's a lot of fear and anxiety around intervening because A, we want to believe that it's not happening, and B, we don't want to
Absolutely.
upset anybody. But obviously, it is an absolute necessity for the safety of the mom and the
Yeah,
baby to
absolutely.
intervene.
Yes, it really is, right? This is wholeheartedly one of those places where you would rather be safe than sorry, right? So absolutely, no harm, no foul. If you have an assessment done and it comes back that that's not the case, great, right? Much better to have done that than to have not done anything, right? For fear of that. And then unfortunately, it's not a good setup, right? So,
No,
yeah.
no. So some of the conversations that both you and I have had with people in the past are where they will have a statement, something along the lines of, I don't love my baby. What's wrong with me? Like,
Mhm.
why do I feel that way? Can we chat a little bit about that?
For sure. Yeah. And you're right. I hear this quite often as well. Not quite often, but enough that it's a pattern,
Yeah.
right? And so there's sort of two possibilities here. One is, again, those myths of motherhood. There's this myth, this perception that as soon as this baby is born, I'm just going to be, have this rush of love and there's just going to be this wave of affection and I'm going to be so in love with this tiny human. That is not the case for everyone, right? For some people, definitely it is, but for other folks, that's not the case. Sometimes that bond needs to develop over time, right? And that's true of people generally in their relationships with others, right? Some people fall really quick, right? Real fast in love. Other people, they need to get to know someone first, right? So in this case, it's the same. Like sometimes we need to get to know this little tiny human. We need to understand a little bit about them. Especially folks who've not had a lot of experience with babies, right? Like maybe they have a lot of questions, maybe they're a little freaked out, right? Like you never know. So sometimes it just takes some time for that bond to really develop, right? That being said, it is a red flag, possibly, right? If it's occurring with some other types of symptoms, right? If we're sort of, they're not feeling, they're not feeling that connection to their baby, but maybe they're also not feeling it to their partner. Or right now, they're also not feeling it toward their other children if they have them, right? And it's a little bit more universal. Then we're going, okay, this is probably a flag for perhaps depression, or even maybe it's just baby blues, right? And there's just all this hormonal stuff happening. And so, again, we want to be able to have conversations with healthcare providers, with our partners, with family members and supports that are honest, right? To say, I'm not really feeling this right now. Like, are you feeling that, right? To partner, maybe, and if I'm not, like, what do I want to do with that, right? So giving it some time, I think, at first, and then if it feels like it's persistent or it feels like it's in combo with some other things, then we might want to have that looked at.
Okay. And for anyone who is experiencing any of these emotions, thoughts, or feelings, do they need referrals? Like, who is their first point of contact for where they go for help? Do they reach out to an organization like yours for counseling, or should they be going to their family doctor first, or what would be the right course of action for people to take?
Hmm. So I typically would say it depends, A, on severity of symptoms and what people are noticing. And as well a little bit of the time frame. So typically, whether you've had an OB who supported you in your birth experience or a midwife, usually there's a 6-week checkup, right? Typically with OBs, midwives. I want to tout midwives. They will check in with you multiple times within that 6-week time frame. So those are for sure first points of contact, especially if you're sort of questioning and you're not really sure, right? Midwives are people who work with delivery and postpartum all of the time, right? So they know what these signs and symptoms are and they can support you in that process. If it feels like it's a little bit more intense, right? It's a little bit more maybe towards like the OCD end or the psychosis end, those things need more immediate intervention than waiting 6 weeks to see your OB. So at that point, you may want to reach out to your family doctor or even go to the emergency department, depending on, right, again, severity of those symptoms. Um, at the same time, if it doesn't feel that severe, there are a lot of great ways to just get support from friends, from family members, from people who've been through this experience, organizations like yours, in fact, actually, right? Connect with people who work in this field, connect with people who, have had kids and understand a little bit more. I never underestimate the power of a Facebook support group, right? Like they're
Yeah.
amazing. They can be really amazing. You can ask questions or you can search a group, right? And just if you don't want to ask, yourself, search the group, see what people have been talking about, right? Again, Facebook groups, support groups do not replace medical intervention by any means, right? But if you think you're on the baby blues end of it, that may not require medical attention, right? That might
Mhm.
just be reassurance that this is normal and this is okay and I'm in a good place, right? So definitely healthcare providers of any kind, nurses, NPs, all of those things can be definitely great. Honestly, at the end of the day, it boils down to who are you going to be most honest with, right? Who are you going to ask and tell, this is what I'm experiencing and I think I need some support. If that's your NP, great. If it's your midwife, great. Wherever you need to go to sort of access that, right? I think that's really important.
And I know that there's a lot of hesitation from people who are experiencing any type of postpartum depression because there's this myth and fear that they're going to take away their
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's something that I would like you to clarify for people that that is really not the case.
No, that happens so rarely. And if you have a skilled healthcare provider, they're going to be able to sort through that with you, right? Um, for me, for example, like I work with folks who have suicidal ideation a lot, actually, because I work with folks who have pretty significant trauma histories. And so they will have suicidal ideation, but for them, it's kind of baseline. Almost every day they have these thoughts, but they're passive thoughts. And so as a skilled clinician, I'm able to start to do assessments to go, okay, do I need to involve emergency services here, or is this something that we can work on together, right? And so that's where you do want to be mindful again of kind of who you are going to is, are these people who are familiar with these experiences, right? If you go to a midwife and say, I'm having thoughts of harming my baby, but I'm really, I don't want to do that. I don't know what's happening. I'm just having these thoughts come in and I'm really uncomfortable with this. Um, Chances are that they're going to go, oh, you might have some, postpartum OCD, right? We should probably assess this a little bit and see what's going on for you. Here are some support options. Here are some, groups you could get connected to. Here are things that you can do, right? So they'll offer you that support. If they think you need a medication, right, then they may need to do a referral for you or support you, right? But they're going to kind of know what to look for. They're not immediately going to go, oh gosh, you say you're going to harm your baby. We need to call, right, child services. They're not going to do that. So looking for those folks that you trust, those folks you can be honest with, and those folks are working within this and can understand it, right?
Yeah. It won't be the first time they've heard your story.
No, no, definitely not. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because like you said, 1 in 5 is the statistic
Yeah,
of how often and how frequent this happens. So it's not going to be news to any of your healthcare providers.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
So what can we do? Is there things that we can do to improve our mental health in that postpartum period so that we can try to either prevent or improve the situation that we're experiencing?
for sure. This is my favorite part of the conversation is here are all of the things that you can look at doing. It's really great. I think, like you mentioned earlier, we are having a lot more conversations about mental health kind of openly. I think we're specifically talking about maternal mental health a lot more openly as well. I know even from my own experience, from my first child to my second, really different conversations that I was seeing, more honesty around people's experiences. So I think we're going in the right direction, hopefully, with that. So that's helpful because what it does is it sort of flags people, brings awareness to say, hey, maybe I should learn a little bit more about that, right? Maybe I should see what other supports are available to me, and all of those things, right? Any early intervention really helps to reduce the likelihood that you're going to experience something, right? So early intervention screening is definitely kind of the first part of that. We really want to identify risk factors, right? And so if you are planning to get pregnant or are pregnant, right, is being mindful of what are your risk factors, right? And do you need to put some things in place for postpartum, right? I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but if for you, having a doula, a night doula come in, right, and offer additional support so that you can sleep a little bit extra, if that helps reduce your risk, right, that service is available. So it's just thinking through, okay, what are my risks and what sort of things can I proactively put in place, right, as much as we can. Um, Taking prenatal class, right? Connecting with organizations such as New Mummy Co. and others that have, support systems available, so we can start to learn and understand what are the signs, right? Understand, for partners, education of what are the vulnerable times in that postpartum experience, right? So knowing that, that 3 to 4 day mark, that's a vulnerable time, right? Weaning, vulnerable time, right? So just being mindful of like what are some of those times that are vulnerable, and what could partner do during those time frames to support their partner, right? Um, and being aware of supports that are available. That's one of the really great things about a lot of our organizations is that we all like to work together and refer to each other, right? Is okay, so if you need some additional support here, go to this place, right? If you need something else, here's another option, right? So you start to know and become aware of what the resources are, even if you don't need them yet, right? It's just kind of knowing what they are. And then if the time occurs that you need to reach out, you're going to feel a little bit more comfortable doing that because you already know what those options are, right? Um, we do want to be mindful of supports being offered or the ones that we connect with, just that they support your values and your beliefs, right? So you want to also just make sure that it's not just a one size fits all of support options, but that you have something that really aligns for you. Different people have different beliefs, right? So we want to make sure that we're aligning well with that. As I mentioned, healthcare providers, of course, group options, therapy, right? So that is something that we definitely get, right? Is folks who are in that actually anywhere in the perinatal process, right? Who are reaching out, sort of wanting a support to say, hey, can you help me through this whole journey, right? I need some additional supports during pregnancy, but I also want to talk about postpartum planning. And then in the postpartum phase, I want to be able to, have some support in that way. So they're looking for like a mental health practitioner who, again, knows the signs and symptoms, and can help support them through that and kind of know what avenues we might need to take, right? With baby blues, for example, we don't typically need to medicate that in any way. We can just offer, mood stabilizing strategies and tips and tools. Whereas if we're talking about psychosis, like the therapist is likely to say, hey, you need a medical intervention here, right? So they kind of know the ins and outs of those things and kind of intervene appropriately, right? The other thing too is, again, easier said than done, but is just being mindful of like your routine and the things you have in it. So often I talk with folks about self-care, which is such a buzzword these days, but is this idea of it's really hard to take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself, right? Put your oxygen mask on first. So, take some time, figure out, okay, how can you get out? Can you go for a walk around the block, some sort of body movement, right? Even if you're putting baby in the stroller and taking baby for a little walk around the block just to get the mail, even, right? Doesn't have to
Yes.
be a lot, but just something. We know that body movement helps decrease risk of depression, right? So we really want to be finding just little ways to do that. And I know I've had two kids. It is not easy to do. I understand it. And when it's hardest to do is actually when you need it the most, right? So getting a group of folks, maybe there's another mom that you can connect with, or maybe partners willing to go for a little walk with you after dinner. Just trying to find those teeny little ways of kind of adding things into your routine that really take care of you, right? Leave babe with partner, with, grandparent, aunt, uncle for a short period of time, take an uninterrupted shower by yourself, right? Or a nice bath. Just those little things that take care of you, because you are still you. Yes, you're a mom, and yes, you're a parent, but also you're still you. So trying to find ways to really take care of yourself in those really difficult times, right? And the last thing I'll just say is, like, I sort of alluded to this, is just in terms of medication. So, medication is really effective if needed. If symptoms are like moderate to severe, right? So, depression or anxiety, all those sorts of things. There are a lot of safe options that folks can use during pregnancy and also if they're nursing. So, again, one of those misconceptions, right? I'm pregnant, I can't take anything. It's not necessarily true. We do know now that there are a lot of safe options. And really and truly, if it's necessary, better to medicate and stabilize, right? And
Mhm.
then be able to again show up in a more have a more positive experience, right? Because of that, than trying to kind of get through it because of fears of what that might do, right? So science is always changing. We're always getting new developments and new options, which is great. So thinking about accessing that if necessary. Right?
Absolutely. And it's probably a good idea for me also to mention that we have postpartum fitness classes here that
Yeah.
we run during the week, and it's twofold. It's for moms to meet other moms, but it is also to provide moms with the option to work on their health. And it is not just their physical health, it's obviously their mental health. And as someone who tries to go to the gym pretty regularly, it's those endorphins that you get from physical exercise. And with our pre and postpartum fitness coaches that we have that work with us, you're in really good hands. And we find that once people start coming, then they typically start to come on a regular basis because they get so much from it. So I think the exercise aspect of it is definitely a really good option because you can get so much from it.
For sure. Yeah, no, you really can. It's multi-layered, right? It's multi-beneficial for sure. Um,
Absolutely.
as we're just talking, so I just realized that I didn't talk a little bit about just postpartum anxiety. Like I went right into OCD
That's true.
and
Yeah.
kind of missed anxiety. So I just wanted to maybe circle back to that for like a quick second. That again, sort of this idea that some level of anxiety is normal, right? Um, so this is a new experience for you, possibly if it's first, but just thinking about like all of those new mom anxieties, right? Of where does baby sleep, and our like SIDS and all of these like frightening things that we talk about. And so recognizing like some level of anxiety is really, really normal, right? When we haven't experienced something before, and so therefore something is unknown, our body, our nervous system alerts us to this thing to say, hey, this thing is new and we don't know what to do here. Like, let's think about this, right? So the first time you're pregnant, you probably have some anxiety about what labor and delivery is going to be like, right? If you've never experienced it before, you gosh, how am I getting this thing out of me? What is going to happen? How is it going to feel? What's the pain going to be like, right? So you have a lot of questions, and so there's likely some anxieties, right? And then once baby comes, right, up again, sleeping is probably one of the most common
Yes.
anxiety related things that folks bring forward, right? Is, when do I move them to their crib? Can they sleep on their own? What happens when they start rolling over and they can lay on their fronts? Oh gosh, do I have to turn them back over, right? I remember with my first going in and turning her back onto her back over and over and over again, right? For weeks. And then went, okay, she's fine. She has the skill. She can do it, right? She can manage it. So there is a reasonable level of anxiety, right? That's going to happen, and this is where those support groups and things can come really, like really in handy. Talk to other parents, like, what was this like for you? How did you navigate this, right? There's also a lot of products on the market aimed at anxious parents, which are unhelpful and sometimes even unsafe, right? So I just want to highlight that's a passion of mine is that there are things on the market that are actually unsafe, but they haven't been banned. Um,
Right.
I don't know why. I don't make the legislature, but unfortunately, that's the case, right? Crib bumpers, for example, you can still buy them at Toys R Us, even though we know that they are incredibly unsafe, right? So just thinking about what the products are on the market, just because it's being sold on the market doesn't make it safe, right? So being really mindful and using that critical thinking or asking those questions in spaces where you can, right? And that's why I was actually alluding to a Facebook group earlier. Like there's a safe infant sleep group, and I learned so much in that group from people asking just general questions, right? What about this? What about that? How does this work? And people taking the time to really help you to understand is really incredibly helpful and calming to go, okay, I'm doing everything that I can to keep this baby safe, right? I'm doing everything in my power, right? If it goes beyond that, right? If it starts to get really intense, that's when you again want to seek out some support from a healthcare provider or a therapist, right? Is, hey, I'm having really intense anxiety, crippling anxiety. I'm having a hard time functioning, right? That level of anxiety that we want to address, right?
Right.
And you had asked again about, can you have more than one? Anxiety and depression actually go together a lot. What sort of happens with that is that we have our nervous system, the way our nervous system functions. If we live in anxiety for a bit too long, or if it feels really overwhelming for the nervous system, it will actually sort of shut you down and it will bring you into a depression. So a lot of folks will come in, I have anxiety and depression. And that's kind of what's happening is the nervous system is kind of jumping from high activation in an anxiety space to high activation, which is really just a shutdown, right? So we want to be aware if that pattern is happening as well, that we need some intervention to try to land a little bit more in the middle. So we're not having these extreme highs and these extreme lows. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real tough period for people when they are in that catch-22 of wanting to improve their overall health and finding that they don't want to get dressed, they don't want to get out of bed. They know that this is going to make them help them feel better. And, my heart breaks for people when they are going through these really tough periods of time, but know that the help is out there and that people want to be able to help you and support you to get back on your feet for however long it will take. And I guess to go back to the very first question that we talked about in terms of, how long is a year? Um, but does depression or anxiety or OCD Does it always show up in the beginning or can it show up later?
It can show up later for sure. Yeah, it definitely can. Um, and can persist, right? And sort of just turn into like regular depression. If we don't want to, if we're not in that medical time frame, right, of postpartum 1 year. So yeah, it definitely can develop later on, again, with different changes, circumstances, right? Perhaps partner something happened, maybe partner left, and now mom doesn't have the same amount of support, or maybe there was a job loss, or some other sort of shifts or changes in their circumstances. Perhaps that particular person is more sensitive to hormonal changes because those happen really significantly in different periods of time, right? So maybe for them, like weaning off of nursing, that's actually when things really start to get a little bit questionable for them, right?
Or if when your period
I was
restarts.
just gonna say that, yeah, right? Yeah, when your period starts to come back, like that could be another time frame, absolutely, right? So this is where I'm saying like there's all of these sort of vulnerable times, and just because it didn't happen in the beginning, or just because it didn't happen to you last pregnancy, or whatever, doesn't mean like, yeah, it could happen at any point in time.
So look after yourself in the first year is the
Yeah.
message.
For sure, right?
Ah,
Yep. Be as connected as you can, as resourced as you can. Beautifully, there's a lot of really amazing free supports out there. There's also a lot of supports that are covered by extended healthcare benefits. Our services, for example, are covered by healthcare benefits, right? So also know what those options are, know what sort of coverage you have, right? And then accessing what you need from there.
and your services in Milton and Waterloo, are they in person or virtual or both?
Both. Yeah, we have both. So all of the therapists, for the most part, across both practices, do hybrid versions of therapy. So we will do both in person and virtual. Yeah,
So if somebody is not local to you, but they are in Ontario, they can reach out to you for a Zoom
definitely.
or Teams
Yeah.
consult.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we offer free consultations. So we do a complimentary 15-minute consultation. Because again, like I said earlier, so important to have a really good fit, right? Have someone that you feel really connected with. So do as many free consults as you want, till you find the person that feels like the right fit. That's ultimately the most important thing.
Yes, yeah, you have to be able to be yourself and vulnerable and real with whoever your therapist is going
Yeah,
um, to be able to get the most from it.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay. So we are going to share some of those free resources that you mentioned. Obviously, we'll provide the information for your counseling service as well. And we will also make sure that if you have any questions, if there is any comments, that we will respond to them. And if it's not something that we can respond to, then we'll ask Nicole to respond to them. And so we hope that you have found today's video helpful. This is a series of videos that we are doing, and there is yet more to come. So we look forward to being back with you very soon. Thank you very much, Nicole, for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I know that you feel as passionate about this as I do. So we really hope that you find this helpful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, such an important conversation. So thank you for having it with me.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. And we'll be back with you again very soon. If you've liked today's video, please do give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you're not subscribed, then just hit that subscribe button so that you get notifications of our new videos. Until next time, take care and look after yourself. Bye bye.